We've been taught to laugh at stupidity, to mock it, to treat it as a harmless quirk of the human condition. But what if I told you that stupidity, true, systemic, infectious stupidity, isn't something to be laughed at? What if it's not the absence of intelligence at all, but a dark force disguised as common sense, quietly steering nations off cliffs while the masses cheer? History is filled with tyrants, but no tyrant ever rose alone. They climbed on the shoulders of fools, not fools in the sense of low IQ or academic failure, but in the deeper, more sinister sense, those who choose comfort over truth, loyalty over logic, obedience over observation. And here's the terrifying part: those fools often believe they are the wise ones. They wrap themselves in flags, in tradition, in moral superiority, all while handing over their freedom one irrational decision at a time. You see, stupidity, real, destructive stupidity, is not random. It is cultivated, encouraged, rewarded. It thrives in the hearts of those who have been taught not to think, but to believe. It flourishes in systems where asking questions is rebellion, and compliance is the highest form of intelligence. This kind of stupidity is political, it is cultural, it is psychological warfare disguised as civility. And the worst part, it recruits its own enforcers, parents who silence their children's questions, teachers who punish curiosity, leaders who demand loyalty, not wisdom. Think about this: a wise person can be silenced by 10 stupid ones united in ignorance. Not because they are correct, but because stupidity, when it becomes the norm, reshapes truth itself. It becomes a religion, a dogma, a national identity, and those who challenge it are branded as traitors, lunatics, or elitists. We live in a time where algorithms feed us the comfort of conformity, where echo chambers reinforce our biases until we believe that feeling right is the same as being right, where facts are twisted, drowned in a flood of manipulated data and weaponized misinformation. And yet, we keep scrolling, we keep nodding, we keep believing, not because we're incapable of understanding the truth, but because the truth demands courage, and stupidity, it only demands obedience. But here's the cruel trickster: stupidity doesn't just make you a victim, it makes you complicit, the worker who follows absurd orders without question, the voter who supports a policy they don't understand because their side supports it, the citizen who watches injustice and whispers, "It's not my problem." These are not neutral positions, these are choices. Every act of blind loyalty is a brick in the wall of oppression. And those bricks are not laid by tyrants. They are handed to them by everyday people, smiling. What makes stupidity so terrifying isn't how dumb it looks, it's how righteous it feels. It can feel like patriotism, it can feel like faith, it can feel like virtue, but underneath it all is fear. Fear of being wrong, fear of being alone, fear of thinking for yourself. And that fear is exploited by those in power, because a terrified, ignorant population is easier to control than an educated, courageous one. That is not a conspiracy, that is a blueprint. But here's the truth they hope you never realize: you were born to be more than this. You were born with the power to question, to observe, to challenge. You were born to recognize patterns and rise above propaganda. You were not designed to be a cog in someone else's machine of control. You were designed to rebel, not through violence, but through vision, not through rage, but through reason. And the world doesn't need more noise, it needs more clarity. This is your call, not to war, but to wake up, to stop laughing off stupidity as harmless and start recognizing it as the virus it is. Because the greatest threat to your freedom isn't evil, it's the silent surrender of your own mind. We begin by rebuilding what's been quietly dismantled, not just in politics or culture, but within ourselves. We teach our children that questioning is a sign of strength, not disrespect. We create spaces where disagreement sharpens minds instead of dividing hearts. We reject slogans and sound bites and replace them with substance. And most importantly, we become accountable for our thoughts, our votes, our silence. Because the moment you realize that your indifference is someone else's oppression, everything changes. And yes, there will be resistance. Stupidity doesn't go down quietly. It screams, it mocks, it gaslights. It will try to convince you that your thinking is dangerous, your questions are divisive, your awareness is arrogance. But let them scream, because the roar of the stupid only proves the silence of the wise has gone on too long. There is no hero coming to save us, there is only you, and the decision you make in this moment. Will you be a vessel for truth, or an echo of stupidity? Will you speak when silence feels safer? Will you think when the crowd demands obedience? Will you dare to be conscious in a world that thrives on unconsciousness? You must, we must, because the terrifying theory of stupidity is no longer just a theory. It's reality, and now that you've heard it, you're part of the resistance, whether you wanted to be or not. And that's exactly what they feared most. Stupidity, in its most dangerous form, is not the absence of intelligence, but the deliberate, systemic suppression of awareness, an engineered state of willful ignorance that serves power structures and sustains control. This kind of stupidity doesn't happen by accident. It is a result of repeated conditioning, societal pressure, and cultural grooming that teaches people not to think critically but to follow instinctively. It's not that people can't think, it's that they are trained not to. They are trained to seek comfort over clarity, simplicity over complexity, and belonging over truth. And in this arrangement, stupidity becomes less about individual capability and more about collective compliance. Modern systems of control don't require a population to be uneducated. They simply need it to be disengaged. People can have access to endless information, but if they lack the skills or courage to process it critically, they become easy prey. And the brilliance of this system lies in how it masks ignorance as normalcy. A society built on distraction doesn't need to censor facts outright. It only needs to flood the mind with noise, opinions, and emotional triggers. It does not silence truth by force, but by making it irrelevant. The result is a culture where stupidity becomes not only accepted but celebrated, as long as it serves the dominant narrative. This cultivated ignorance is incentivized. People are rewarded socially, politically, and economically for aligning with groupthink. The more one echoes the approved views, the more validation they receive. Contrarians, on the other hand, are shamed, ridiculed, or ostracized. Over time, individuals learn to silence their doubts, to bury their independent observations, and to adopt the approved worldview not because they genuinely believe it, but because it's safer. In such a context, stupidity is no longer a personal shortcoming. It becomes a defense mechanism. It becomes a way of surviving in a society that punishes original thought. There's a key psychological twist in this process. People begin to conflate ignorance with innocence. They convince themselves that they are just following orders, or just doing their job. But these are not neutral positions. When ignorance is weaponized, neutrality becomes complicity. The willfully ignorant individual, whether a bureaucrat enforcing an absurd policy, a citizen uncritically echoing propaganda, or a parent blindly passing down prejudices, is not an innocent bystander. They are an enabler of injustice, and because they lack self-awareness, they often cannot see the harm they perpetuate. Worse, they may genuinely believe they are doing good. The psychological comfort of stupidity is seductive. It offers certainty where life offers ambiguity. It offers tribal belonging where thoughtfulness might cause isolation. It offers emotional satisfaction, especially in the form of moral superiority, without the burden of intellectual rigor. It allows people to speak loudly and confidently on topics they know little about, because the social rewards for certainty are greater than those for humility. And once people become emotionally invested in their ignorance, they will defend it more passionately than the truth. That's why logical arguments often fail against systemic stupidity. It's not a battle of facts, but of identity. This kind of engineered stupidity does not affect everyone equally. It flourishes under systems of inequality. It is often most effective among those who are comfortable, those who benefit from the status quo. These individuals are the least likely to question the systems that favor them, and the most likely to defend their ignorance as tradition, patriotism, or common sense. Their willful blindness allows exploitation, marginalization, and violence to continue unchecked because they refuse to acknowledge what does not affect them personally, And because they often hold power, their ignorance becomes policy, shaping the lives of millions. Technology has only accelerated this phenomenon. Social media algorithms optimize for engagement, not truth. News is curated based on emotional response, not intellectual merit. The result is a feedback loop where people are constantly bombarded with information that confirms their biases and shields them from contradiction. Over time, these digital echo chambers reinforce stupidity by making it feel like consensus. Dissenting voices are filtered out, not because they are wrong, but because they are inconvenient, and so, an entire generation can grow up feeling informed while actually being deeply misled. In this environment, stupidity becomes a weapon, not one wielded by the masses, but one used on them. It is not about dumb people making poor choices. It is about clever systems making ignorance profitable. It's not about a lack of education, but a lack of reflection. It's not about intelligence, but about intention. And when intention is replaced by inertia, when people choose not to know, not to see, not to care, stupidity becomes a form of violence. It becomes a passive assault on truth, on justice, on progress. And the most terrifying part, it looks just like everyday life. The most dangerous form of stupidity is not loud, brash, or obvious. It is the kind that wears a mask of virtue. It doesn't look like ignorance. It looks like morality. It disguises itself in good intentions, in noble language, in causes that seem just on the surface. But beneath that polished exterior lies a hollow core, blind belief, unchallenged assumptions, and a deep resistance to uncomfortable truth. This is what makes it so dangerous. It fools not only others but the person wielding it. They are not just convinced they are right, they are convinced they are righteous. And in that conviction, they stop listening, stop learning, and start enforcing. This variety of stupidity is particularly destructive because it weaponizes morality. It transforms decency into dogma. People no longer argue facts, they argue feelings. Instead of asking what is true, they ask what feels virtuous. And the moment feelings replace facts as the compass of thought, critical thinking collapses. It becomes less about understanding the world and more about defending one's identity as a good person. And ironically, that desire to be seen as good becomes the very mechanism through which harm is justified. Look at how history records the most devastating events. Many of the people who participated in them believed they were doing the right thing. They weren't driven by overt hatred, but by a manipulated sense of duty, of loyalty, of moral obligation. The cruelty wasn't carried out by monsters. It was executed by neighbors, teachers, soldiers, and clerks who believed their role was righteous. They acted not out of malice, but out of the belief that they were serving a higher good. This is the hallmark of stupidity masked as virtue. It takes ordinary people and makes them instruments of destruction, not because they're evil, but because they're convinced they're not. This phenomenon is exacerbated in societies where moral superiority is a social currency. In such systems, people are conditioned to signal virtue more than they are encouraged to pursue truth, speaking the correct phrases, aligning with the correct views, and condemning the incorrect ones becomes a way of earning status. But when morality becomes performative, when it's more about being seen as good than doing what is good, critical thought becomes a threat. Anyone who questions the prevailing narrative is not just seen as wrong, they are cast as immoral. And that moral judgment silences dissent, even when that dissent is grounded in truth. This is especially dangerous because it transforms stupidity into a collective shield against reflection. If everyone around you agrees that your cause is just, that your opinions are virtuous, and that your enemies are evil, then why would you ever question yourself? Why would you stop and analyze your beliefs if doing so risks being seen as disloyal to the cause? And so, the cycle deepens, the individual loses autonomy, they no longer think for themselves, they think in service to an identity, a tribe, a flag, a belief system, and what looks like passionate advocacy is often just performative compliance wrapped in self-righteousness. Another layer to this problem is the psychological reward it gives. Acting on this kind of stupidity feels good. It feels empowering. It feels noble. People get to feel like heroes in their own stories. They aren't just passive bystanders, they are warriors for justice, defenders of what's right. But the more they invest emotionally in that role, the less willing they become to confront evidence that challenges it. Admitting they were wrong doesn't just threaten their argument, it threatens their self-image, and so they double down, they ignore contradiction, they attack the messenger, they rewrite the narrative to preserve their illusion of virtue. Social structures further amplify this by creating safe zones of groupthink. In online communities, academic spaces, religious congregations, or political circles, people are encouraged to echo the same ideas and ostracize those who think differently. The performance of virtue becomes contagious. It creates an environment where questioning the dominant moral stance isn't just frowned upon, it's punished. People who raise complex, nuanced points are accused of being problematic, insensitive, or even dangerous. And so, fear takes hold. People self-censor, they simplify their views, they adopt the script, and stupidity, now cloaked in moral purity, becomes institutionalized. This is not a rejection of morality, it's a warning against counterfeit virtue. Real morality is built on humility. It requires the courage to examine oneself, to change, to admit when one is wrong. But stupidity wearing the mask of virtue does the opposite. It calcifies the ego. It convinces people that their goodness exempts them from introspection. And once someone believes their intentions are inherently pure, they feel justified in doing almost anything in the name of their cause, censoring, shaming, excluding, even harming. They don't recognize the damage because they don't see themselves as capable of causing it. The truly dangerous aspect is that this form of stupidity often rises to positions of influence. Because it sounds noble, because it looks like leadership, people trust it. They follow it, they fund it, they amplify it, and slowly the fabric of a society starts to rot, not through open hostility, but through smug, well-dressed ignorance that silences dissent and punishes independent thought. A society led by stupid virtue doesn't just stagnate, it regresses, believing all the while that it is progressing. That is the tragedy, and that is why stupidity with a moral mask is not merely an intellectual error, it is a psychological and cultural threat. Societies do not collapse merely because of the presence of evil, they collapse because of the passive, silent permission granted by the comfortably ignorant. Evil, on its own, is rarely powerful enough to dismantle institutions, destroy freedoms, or distort reality. It needs enablers, people who may not act out of malice, but who choose convenience over conscience, silence over resistance, and normalcy over awareness. These individuals are not the ones issuing orders or pulling the levers of systemic control. They are the ones looking away, they are the ones whispering, "It's not my responsibility," as injustice festers in plain sight, and they are often the majority. What makes this kind of passive complicity so destructive is how unremarkable it appears. It doesn't scream, it doesn't march, it doesn't even speak. It blends into the background of daily life, cloaked in routine and apathy, but its impact is massive. The small decisions people make, to not read beyond headlines, to avoid difficult conversations, to support policies they don't understand because their side endorses them, all contribute to the normalization of corruption, intolerance, and repression. The structure of a collapsing society is not built by villains alone. It is assembled one quiet, negligent choice at a time by ordinary people unwilling to face discomfort. This ignorance is comfortable because it allows people to preserve their peace. Facing reality means confronting the ways they may be complicit, the privileges they may enjoy at the expense of others, or the lies they've internalized as truths. And so, instead of engaging with the truth, they bury it. Instead of analyzing the system, they rationalize it. Comfort becomes a shield, and with time that shield turns into a blindfold. These people are not unintelligent, they are uninterested. Not because the world is beyond their understanding, but because the truth threatens their constructed sense of security. Over time, this cultivated detachment becomes cultural. It's passed down generationally. Children are taught, sometimes explicitly but often implicitly, that silence is safer than speaking out, that following rules is more important than questioning them, and that survival requires fitting in, not standing up. The result is a society where people become conditioned to wait for others to act. They convince themselves that someone more informed, more powerful, or more righteous will do what needs to be done. But that someone never arrives, because everyone is waiting, everyone is protecting their peace, and in that collective hesitation, darkness gains momentum. When injustice becomes systemic, when truth is under siege, the silence of the comfortably ignorant does more damage than the efforts of the actively malicious. The malicious may be few, but their power is multiplied when no one resists. The ignorant majority may not agree with cruelty or corruption, but their failure to challenge it grants it legitimacy. Their refusal to speak up is interpreted as compliance. Their unwillingness to understand is seen as consent. And power structures thrive on this inertia. They don't need widespread loyalty, just enough indifference to keep going unchallenged. In this state, even the most extreme ideologies can flourish, not because the public endorses them, but because the public doesn't oppose them. Authoritarian leaders, for instance, often rise with the passive approval of citizens who are tired, afraid, or just disengaged. By the time the consequences of that passivity become clear, it's too late. The structures are already in place, the freedoms are already gone, the damage is already done, and the comfortably ignorant are left asking how it all happened, never realizing they were part of how it happened. This phenomenon is reinforced by the illusion of neutrality. Many people genuinely believe that by staying out of politics, controversy, or activism, they are remaining neutral. But neutrality in the face of injustice is not neutrality, it's alignment with the status quo. It's a vote for the continuation of harm. It allows those who abuse power to continue doing so without challenge, because inaction, especially when multiplied across millions, creates a vacuum of resistance. And that vacuum is always filled by propaganda, by control, by coercion disguised as order. The comfortably ignorant often see themselves as normal. They don't recognize that their version of normal is constructed by privilege, by media narratives, by filtered experiences. They fail to see beyond their personal peace, so they struggle to empathize with those who suffer. When they do see suffering, they rationalize it. It must be their fault, or it's complicated, or things have always been this way. These rationalizations are not born from cruelty, but from the desire to avoid disruption. But the result is the same. Systems of inequality and abuse continue unimpeded. The terrifying truth is that evil doesn't need to win by convincing everyone to join it. It only needs to ensure that enough people do nothing. It thrives on hesitation, on comfort, on the widespread belief that things are not that bad, or will work themselves out. It thrives when people believe that their voice doesn't matter, that resistance is someone else's job, that understanding the system is too complex to bother with, and while they sit safely in their silence, history moves forward, without them or against them.